Hello and welcome back to Chat by the Pitch. This is Ian Babcock, your host. This is part 2 with Coach Andy Cook. Culture, trust, and why the individual matters more than the team until 18. A quick heads up, we hit a few connection issues in this one, so you may catch a few rough patches in the audio, so stick with it because what Andy has to say is here and it's worth it. So let's start this chat and head to the pitch.
What was those moments that grew you as a coach that you saw looking back, reflecting, and even in the moment, if you have moments that were like these aha moments in those moments?
Yeah, I think after Oxford, I moved to Sunderland, and to bring that in, I was only at Sunderland for that time. My first son was born, and so I was like a stay-at-home dad at the time. My ex-wife would go to work, and then I was staying at home with my son, and that allowed me, because I was in between work full time. Sunderland was a prime role, and so I could work at Sunderland. I could really develop things, and you've mentioned it, being a parent. That was where it was a bit of a change for me of going, oh my God, that is a eureka moment of being a parent has allowed me to really understand how children learn, the determination that they have. And when I was at Sunderland, it was something that I could really put together because I was working with the under 14s, under 15s, under 13s at the time. And it got me back on the grass. I could start to coach. I could start to put cones down to develop myself back into the coaching mold and think the next head coach role I have, which happened to be at Nottingham Forest, how could I then put everything together and build up a program and an environment that brings together the on-pitch coaching, which was what I got again from Sunderland, the little bits that I'd learned as a parent of a young boy, and then obviously the management skills that I think I needed to improve from my time at Oxford. And Nottingham Forest was the perfect environment for that. Again, I think at the time I was the first coach in England to have a full-time job in the third tier of the English women's pyramid. So WSL, you had WSL2, and then you had the tier 3, which is where Nottingham Forest were. And I took over a team that had finished one place above the relegation spot. So it had a team that was a little bit disjointed, a little bit broken, that had fractions in and around the team beforehand. However, when I arrived, I found a group of players that were so determined to play for their city. So several of the girls and several of the women played for Nottingham Forest. They were born at Nottingham Forest, and that's all they knew. We managed to bring in some excellent players from outside and start to improve that. We had Lee Billiard, who was at Boston Breakers. He was the general manager at the time. He brought me in, and we managed to build this environment that over the next 4 years ended up we won the league, we got into the promotion game that we had at the time, and only one team would go up, and unfortunately we lost that, but we won the league, we won the cup, we'd won the cup the previous year, and several of those players that started with me in 2019 were still there in 2023. And that environment that took those players from finishing 10th to then in 4 years' time finishing first really just allowed them to just express themselves in a different way. Like I said, the first thing I did as a manager, I said, every decision I make, I'm going to explain it to you. It doesn't matter whether it takes me an hour or whether it takes me 2 minutes. I'm going to explain my decision. And I do think that in the women's game, that is something that's maybe taken for granted by many coaches that I've worked with, that you need to speak to these people. You need to speak to the players to allow them to understand the why of this is why we're doing it, and this is why I've either started you, I've either left you out, or I've started you on the substitutes bench. And that's where I really started at Nottingham Forest, and I've just gained a bit more confidence. I found a little bit more connection with different people, and sometimes you'll have several players that react in the same way. Some like it, some don't. But that's probably the key change I made as a man manager of how I could get across my decisions. And what I found is just absolute positivity. Like I say, there's several players from that team that I found in 2019 that I'm still in touch with. We unfortunately attended a funeral of a colleague 2 weeks ago, actually, and yeah, a few of the players that were there in 2019 were at this funeral, and we spoke about those times and just the connection that we had, the way that we worked as a group at Nottingham Forest. The environment was so good and so positive, and several players that I unfortunately had to sit across from and say, look, we're going to move on. We're going to go one way. Unfortunately, this isn't for you anymore. It's down to you to prove us wrong, but we're going to go this way. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate to contact. So they've all kept in touch and they still keep in touch. So even in those dark moments, I feel that part of my management skill has really improved and has allowed me to create environments and, like you say, programs that just foster people to be themselves. And at Nottingham Forest, it was everything. It was a brilliant 4 years, every minute of it, and ultimately it ended in trophies, which at that point in my career, I hadn't had trophies. It felt like, do you want to chase the trophies? Do you want to chase the victories? And what I did find is that when you deal with the people, you manage the people well, you speak to them and treat them as human beings, you treat them as individuals anyway, then you get so much back the other way. Once you give them that little bit of fight, the battle, earn the right to play is a phrase I say a lot. If you can do that and you can show them how to do it, you start getting victories. It just rolls and rolls. And at Nottingham Forest, it ended with, like I say, we won the league. We were top goal scorers by 22 goals. I think we only conceded 17 that season. We were the fewest conceded goals. We won the league. We won the cup, so we did the double. We unfortunately didn't win the playoffs that season. And then Newcastle United came calling and asked me to come and help them get promotion from the same tier. And that's where I went after that. But the environment that was built was based around the management of the players off the field, the skills and abilities of the players as individuals, and putting them into instead of a system fitting the players sitting on a system, it was the system fitting around the players, and then ultimately allowing them to go and play and to go and express themselves within a really defined defensive system there. So it was everything, and we went through so many different ways. I think back when I first started, we had a 4-2-3-1 system that was very structured, very defensive. Then we opened it up a little bit. It was a bit more of a 4-4-2. The third season was, we ended up finishing 5th in the third season. We won one of the cups, but we started the season with a back 3. Then we had a middle 4 and 1 striker with 2 wing backs. We had a box midfield. Then that became a diamond in midfield with 2 wing backs and a back 3. Halfway through, then we went into a proper 4-4-2, and we had so many different structures in the third season, which is probably why we finished 5th. But then the summer after that, we made a few positional changes. And one of the key positional changes was we took a player called Charlotte Greengrass, who is a left back or a left centre back, and we put her up front. We played her as the number 9, and in the season that we won the league, she scored 22 goals, was top goal scorer, and she now plays for Wolves, and she now wears the number 9 shirt for Wolves, is playing in the WSL2. And again, it was another point for me that it was dealing with her as an individual, dealing with each individual, allowing them to express themselves, but finding a structure and a formation that fitted the players that we had. So we went back to a more traditional 4-3-3. We had 1 holding midfielder, 2 attacking midfielders, and Charlotte Greengrass as the focal central forward player with quick wingers. We just blew the league away. We had a brilliant battle with Wolves. And again, tactical detail was the first time I found myself in a situation where I needed to be so good on the pitch and off it as a manager. And it just all came together. We unfortunately didn't win that playoff game, which still, I still look back on it now, and it was a tough one because we lost the game 1-0, but we put so much into it, and the team that we had, the players that we had, there was so much love between everyone that it would have been brilliant to do it for Nottingham Forest and to ultimately get promotion there. But unfortunately, they had to wait a little bit. But the next season, I went to Newcastle, and we managed to do that.
Like that, to me, it's just amazing. And you're building it from scratch, and it takes time. It's not like it's an overnight success. you saw the success progress, if with ups and downs and valleys and everything in between, and it's amazing. Is there a way to repeat this formula when you're coaching, or is this just something you said it to me that hit it on the head? And I don't feel like youth coaches do a good job at this. They play with the style of play that they want to play in instead of playing with the players in front of them. And I'm not doing a bash on the MLS, but I always love watching the MLS. And my wife will point out, why are they not changing formation? Why are they not doing this? Because they're not playing with the players in front of them. The coach is playing with what they want to play with, the formations and the tactics, and not playing with their players.
Yeah, look, this is probably a little bit like the conversation around, and it might be a good time to bring it back in regards to the why England caught up to America. I think my own opinion on this is I am a pragmatist. I am a realist. I see what's in front of me, and I always think that my eyes don't lie. So if I've got a group of footballers in front of me, my first instinct is always to go, what can they do now? So if I throw a ball out, and if we've got 22 players in front of me and we put 11v11 match on, I'm going to just throw a ball out and say, here we go, show me what you can do. And if they start playing and one team is playing a direct style, they're going from the back line to the middle to the forward line, or sometimes skipping the middle line and going straight to the top line, and then they're flicking it out wide. The wingers are really quick. I think, okay, how can we now get the best out of those individual players? If the other team start playing from the goalie to the defender, to the fullback, to the central midfielder, to the fullback, to the winger, to the forward, to the midfielder, and they start bouncing the ball around and go, okay, they're very technical. They might now, this is how we might be able to work it, but and so for me, it's always working on what's in front of you. If you're a mechanic and a guy brings a Ford Mustang into your garage, you're not going to start to deal with it like you would do a Lamborghini because it's a Ford. So for me, you've got to deal with what's in front of you. The coaches that I think are the best coaches, and this sometimes I think is a hot topic. Everybody talks in England about Pep Guardiola and how good he was, and he, for me, is probably the best coach that we've had in the last decade. However, I think he coached the players that were in front of him, and he brought in the fullbacks. Yes, he brought in Edison. But then when he brought in Haaland, all of a sudden, Man City went from the goalkeeper to the centre forward more than any other team in the country. More than any other team. They would play a long ball because Haaland is this big Norwegian guy who can take it on his chest and he can play. So all Pep Guardiola was doing was working what was in front of him. And if you look at his career, when he went to Germany, the first few games, the Bayern Munich team was getting overrun because they weren't dealing with the transitions, because in Spain, he hadn't had to deal with that. So if you look at his career in the early times at Munich, all of a sudden it was, how can we control the second contact, the third contact to stop the transitions? And then once they'd managed to do that, they could then play how he wants them to play. But he dealt with the players that were in front of him. He had a player called Thomas Muller, who is a brilliant on the eye. He scored loads of goals for him. So he worked with the people that were in front of him. However, Pep Guardiola does have a style. He does have a way that he wants everybody to play. And he's managed to take people like John Stones in England to another level in terms of how he plays the game. For me, that's what I've always tried to do, in a sense of what footballers have I got in front of me and how can I make them work? And like I said, my time at Nottingham Forest, I played with a back three. I played with a back four. I had 4 in midfield centrally. I had 3 in midfield centrally. Sometimes there was one season where, like I said, the third, we had wing backs. We've also played with high wingers and then fullbacks that work inside. So that's just, for me, the art of coaching. If you've got to try and get the best out of the individual that's in front of you. And then that's also the beauty of it, because one right back is very different to another right back. So if you play one of them, they're going to maybe overlap. But then the other one likes to go inside. So if you're going to play with this one, they're going to go around. But then when you substitute them, you bring them in, that changes your tactical profile. And so that adapts again. So for a youth coach, I think, or youth coaches, I think they've got to be a balance between the style and between the individual that's in front of them, because you want to improve the individual that's in front of you. but you also want them to try and play within a team. However, as a youth coach, for me, up until the age of, 18, I think the individual is absolutely paramount. Absolutely paramount. The individual is a goalkeeper, a centre-back, a full-back, a midfielder. That individual has to get your complete... Teams at youth level don't do anything. It's the individual. Early on in my career, Beth Mead, Leah Williamson, I spoke about Ellie Christen, Emma Kelly at Middlesbrough. You've also got Carla Humphrey, you've got Molly Bartrup, you've got Leanne Robe, you've got several other players. They're all individuals. They're none of the teams. Later on in my career, I'll now talk to you about teams, because the team wins. Nottingham Forest win, Newcastle United win, Norwich City win. Early on in the career, the individual. Leah Williamson became England captain, not the team that Leah Williamson played in. It was a very good team. It had a lot of players, but Leah Williamson became the England captain. Beth Mead became one of the top goal scorers in the WSL, big goal scorers in England's history. It's all about the individual at such a young age, and then the older you get, and if you're fortunate enough to be a head coach of a team that's maybe above the age of 18 and playing professionally, you have to win football matches. The individual becomes about the you make them feel, because you need them to play for you, you need them to play for the team. And I used Charlotte Greengrass as the example. So Charlotte Greengrass was a young England international. She played, I think, under 17, under 18, under 19, and she played as a defender, left centre-back or left-back. She wasn't left-footed, by the way. That's just where she played. And then some reason, myself and the coaching staff at Nottingham Forest, we just seen this little bit in her that we were like, she could play up front. And it was just going back to your question earlier of what was it? When you throw the ball, she could touch it and it would fall to her feet. And she could play, she could pass, she could move, she could shoot. When she was in defence, it was always just a little bit like, this is going to sound bad, but it was a bit like she had more to give. It was as if she was playing within herself. But then when you put her up front, all of a sudden, it was like you'd freed her from the shackles of a defender. It was balls to feet, she could turn, she could twist, past the defender, she'd shoot, and all of a sudden we were like, we've managed to find a number 9. We've managed to find a player that's as good as, this is going to be a bit over the top, but as good as Haaland in the women's game. We just found her. She was playing left back, and we put her up. There's several names I could give you now where a player has moved from one position and I've put them in a different position and they've just flourished. But I think that comes down to the management when you're working with the team.
You hit on a few things there, and I think as parents, looking at it from a parent perspective, you never know where the player's going to be successful, and it takes the right coach to, you talked about it earlier, pull that out of them. And I don't know anything more than that to say on that. It's taking a chance, looking at the profile and figuring out, you talked about and being free from defense. I think players get pigeonholed or put into positions that may not fit their actual personality. Their profile might fit it, but their personality, and then their profile changes because now they're allowed to show their personality actually on the pitch. And that's the only way I think I can describe it coming from my perspective, because I look at it from the psychological side of the game.
Yeah, I think I completely... The profile of the player, you could say that they're quick, or that they're strong, or that their physical profile. So a quick player, usually you play them on the wing. As an example, a very fast kid, you'll put them in a wide position because they're so quick. And then a strong player often is played at the back. But one player went up front, or went in midfield, or the quick player played at centre-back, or in goal, dare I say it. In goal might be a position that they find all of a sudden frees them because of whatever reason, but you don't know that until you try. And I think that's the beauty of youth football. You should try everything. There's no wrong answer, because I was going to make a big statement there. I was going to say it doesn't matter. As long as you're enjoying it, as long as the kids enjoy it, as long as they come away with a smile on the face, hopefully they've learned a little bit. And especially at 8, 9, 10. My oldest son now he's just turned 9, and I say to him all the time, he plays up front, then he'll play in defence, then he'll play in goal, then he'll play on the... And he's like, what do you think? I'm like, did you enjoy it? He's like, yeah. Okay, that's fine. And I sometimes think there's that one where, because of the job I have and the places I've worked, I think there's a bit of pressure on him, because people, or my two sons, they're going to be footballers, they're going to be this. If I'm really honest, I'd love them to be golfers, because I'd love to travel around the world and watch them play golf, but that's just, I love golf. But if, all I want them to do is enjoy it. I want them to enjoy playing football. I want them to get out of football more than I did, because I didn't actually start playing until I was about 10, I think, or 11. So they're starting a lot earlier than I am. And so I think to myself, they just need to enjoy it, because as a coach, that's what I try and do for the players now. Even senior pros that are in their 30s and their late 20s that I coach now, first thing I want them to do is enjoy it. I often say it, like when I was at Norwich, I would get the players in and it'd be a sunny day, we'd be there coaching, and if there was a few faces of just, I'm like, stop. You're playing football, we're all here. This is perfect. There's nothing better than this right now. We have the best job in the world, because we're on the grass, we're playing football. Let's enjoy it and let's get a little bit out of it. And then when you're enjoying it, you get so much more. You get so much freedom. You play, you can express yourself. And at 27, you should still play the game like you're 7. And if at 7 years old, you're having the fun kicked out of you because somebody on the sideline is screaming, whether that's a parent or whether that's a coach, I think it's so wrong, and it should be the opposite. You should stand and watch them and encourage the players to talk, to shout, to enjoy it, to celebrate, also to learn to lose as well when a goal goes in, and shake hands and all of those things. But it should be very much just the enjoyment is the paramount.
I like that. One thing I say quite a bit is we have to protect the joy. It's the one thing in all the interviews I've done, everything talking about the youth game, we talk about protecting the joy. To me, joy is not a fleeting moment, it's the destination. And because happiness is the moment, joy is the journey. And we as parents, I say often, we suck the joy out of it because we're so loud and vicious to our own kids, unfortunately. And coaches can suck the joy out of the conversation with them and make the game what it shouldn't be. It's supposed to be fun. My dream of both my kids, if they both stick with soccer and play at a high level, is for them to be I joke with my son, you should be out there at 80 years old with walkers kicking a soccer ball around on the pitch. That'd be a fun game to watch, as a bunch of just don't break a hip out there. And that's the thing. It's like, as a parent, that's what I want for my kids. And it has taken me a long time to get to that point, to realize that. And then on top of it, I'm still learning this lesson probably daily. It's, how do I not suck the fun out of it for him or my daughter or whatever their activities are? It's not just soccer, it's everything. And we have to protect the joy. We have to protect and create those environments where they can grow to foster and love the game. And which leads me into, before we jump into that, I want to touch on that because I know what the time frame is we have. I want to talk about the women's game and why the Lionesses are catching up to the States, because this is a very important thing I think parents need to understand. And I'll start off with my opinion, and you can fill in the gaps wherever I'm falling short. For the last 40 years in the 80s, we got Title IX here in the United States. And Title IX changed how money was spent in sports, from collegiate all the way through high school. And so we were dumping a ton of money into women's sports before the rest of the world was dumping money into it. And we already had a decent soccer program here, but now it just grew exponentially because it became a high school program. It became clubs, girls club soccer started to flourish here in the States because it was part of the high school programs. And that allowed it to grow where the rest of the world was not putting money in it yet. And this is why we had such a great advantage over the rest of the world. We had a 20-year head start than the whole world. And now we're seeing these countries dumping the money into it like we have. The only difference, I feel, is the pyramid that they have for development around the world is better than we have in the United States. We don't have the first touch. We don't have the IQ. And we don't foster that enough here. And that's my opinion. So tell me where I'm wrong and how you see it and how the game should be going.
Look, I think From what I understand of the women's game in the US, I still think it's the strongest, if not one of the strongest in the world still. However, I think, as you've said, everybody has now caught up to the US, whether that's at the collegiate level or whether that is obviously the national level. And I think even as a playing system, the league system that we have in England, the WSL, I think now, as you see, the money that's getting put into the WSL is maybe at the same level, if not maybe it's a little bit more than the NWSL. So that is just something that, again, has been a natural growth. You said you had a 25-year head start. I think that is definitely true. What I see from American players, they're athletes, absolute athletes. I think you could take a female soccer player and put her into an athletic program and she would probably do really well. Whereas I think if you take a English footballer and put her into an athletic program, she would do okay if she was like a central midfielder and she had good endurance, but she wouldn't do brilliantly in maybe an athletic program. There'd be a certain player that would do that, obviously, as like a sprinter or whatever it might be. But I think that for me is probably the biggest difference. I do feel that technically Spain for me is the best, and then a close second to them is Japan, and then after that you've got several different nations around the world that are very good technically, but then it's then the tactical side of the game, it is then the physical side of the game. However, I do think that the US physically are still one of the very best in the world.
So let's talk more about you as the individual, because you talked about all these things. We talked about the women's national team here, and this comes down to a couple of key important things as a parent that I think is important. It is the culture and leadership that you build in and off the pitch, in the locker room, and expectations you hold for players. So let's start talking about that first, because that's the only way you build trust. I think, as I've talked to several coaches here and have some great sideline pitch conversations, that is one thing they all have talked about, is creating an environment where kids feel and athletes feel safe, and more importantly, you build trust with the players. So how do you start building trust with players when you first meet them within the first 30 days or so of working with them?
The key moment for me is always the first, handful of meetings. Now, I give you what that is, and I think it's like Simon Sinek, I think in one of his TED Talks, I think he mentioned that trust is built up anywhere between 7 minutes and 7 months. And ultimately, that's what I can say, that it's some players will feel it straight away. They'll just feel this connection. You know, I like Andy, I like what he stands for, I like how he coaches, I like how he speaks. And then some, it'll take a little bit longer. There might be a little bit more of a kinesthetic learner. There might be a bit more of a visual learner. They want to see what I do on the pitch or how I communicate on the pitch. Or even in a tough moment, they might be like, yeah, this is all great in the first couple of meetings, because ultimately I'm trying to get them over, they're trying to win me over, and all those analogies that you put together. But in the tough moments, what's really seen, and I would say that's probably the biggest window of opportunity to connect with your players and build trust, is in those tough moments. That might be something that happens in their life, it might be something that happens in your life, it might be a tough moment in a season. A player gets injured. The obvious one is when you pick them or don't pick them. And I think that's really where I build my trust with players quickly, because from day one, over the last 3 teams I've worked with, I've always said that this is the best moment. I haven't picked a team yet. You haven't been in a position where you're either starting or not starting or on the bench, whatever it is. So this is the best moment. After this, it's either going to be good, bad, or indifferent. And I'll tell you, if it's bad, I'm going to explain why, but this is my reasons for it. And if it's indifferent on the bench, you've been in a reason, but those are good. I wouldn't desist me on of that, the trust in those moments, and those moments can come anytime. However, for me as a head coach, I always think you've got a moment every week to explain your decisions, to build up your trust, and to build up that empathy and all the other human emotions that you have with every other human being. And that's the key bit to building.
I think that's important. I think having taken those moments, taking those times to build those moments is so critical. I look at it from a parent with 2 young kids, and I don't feel coaches know how to communicate well with kids unless they have kids that age. And from the sounds of it, that was something that you've built upon and not just fell into or have learned. It's something, from the sounds of it, you actually started from the beginning with, because you wouldn't be as successful as you are working with these players and having the impact on them if you didn't know how to effectively communicate with these players. So that's a big piece of your communication is a big part of your culture. What else is expectations or leadership skills that you try to foster with the players on the pitch so they can have these skill sets to be phenomenal when they're on the pitch?
Yeah, I think the two biggest ones for me are accountability and respect. And I think that really starts with me. I am always accountable to my own actions. So if I make a good decision, that's absolutely fine. We'll know we made a good decision based on the coaching session, how it's gone, the playing, the style, the team selection, whatever it is. If you make a good decision, I'm going to praise you all day, all night. That was for whatever it is against the tactic game plan that we have, because I've seen that you want from the do. It's just the ability to go saw, but it went wrong. And then it doesn't matter if it's me or whether it's the assistant coaches or whether it's the staff or whether it's the other players, you can have a conversation. If you're big enough to hold your hand up and say, I got that wrong. And that's the other side of it for me. Whenever I've made a decision that hasn't gone well, you can speak to any player that I've ever worked with. I've always held my hand up and said, I got that wrong. And I've got it wrong in big moments. I've got it wrong in small games. There's several times where I've got it wrong, but I always hold my hand up and I'll always say, yeah, we didn't get it right there, and that was because of me. And I've had players come back and say, look, Andy, that isn't on you. We needed to do better. I say, okay, that's fine. The other one is respect. I think that then is the net of that. You all respect all the staff we have, the different members, whether it's you've got everything from sports science now to even, bus drivers, your catering, all of those different people that you come into contact with. You've got to show them respect. It doesn't matter what level they're at or where they're at. If they're wearing the same badge as you, when they're in the same building as you, you've got to respect them. And then the key bit is when you go away from home, you have to show the opposition the same level of respect. For me, that is absolute paramount. If you go away and you are a disgrace in the changing rooms, where we've had it where teams have come to, whether it's Norwich or Nottingham or Newcastle, and the away changing room is disgusting when they leave, I just think to myself, I wouldn't want to be a part of that squad. I want a team that leaves the changing room better than what it was when we got in there. We want to leave it clean. We want to go and they'll go, wow. Because for me, everything just builds this aura and this picture of, and this story of, wow, when this team comes to town, this team that Andy's coaching, they're always accountable to each other. They're always accountable to themselves. They show so much respect to everybody, officials, staff, the opposition. They're in a good moment. And then the positive, all that enjoyment comes into it. And ultimately, the communication that we have as staff and players, it leads to this really positive environment. So for me, they're the two absolute non-negotiables. You have to show respect. You have to be accountable to your actions. And I'll show them first and foremost.
That helps build the trust, that helps build the culture and within the team. So how does that translate for recruiting? Do you have players that you've played against and you talked about leaving the locker room better than you found it? My favorite example is Japan. When they come into countries, they clean the stadiums. The locker room is by far immaculate. And then you watch other countries come through. I won't name them. And it's a wreck when they leave. But players pay attention to that stuff. They just don't see it. They see the small details. They start picking up the small details from how you coach from the sideline to how comments are made around the field, how your players react to your frustration or your comments. How does that recruit the players, and recruiting to the person first and then recruiting to the football skills?
So one thing that I've done whenever I've tried to recruit any player or staff is the question I always leave them with is go and find somebody that's worked with me and ask them what do they think. So whether it's a player, whether it's a staff member, whatever it is, if you trust them, because at the moment you don't trust me, I'm trying to sell you the dream of coming to play for wherever I'm working. So if you can go and find someone that you already trust and you say, do you know Andy? Okay, what's he like? And then they can give you a good or a bad perspective on me. But I'm comfortable in my own skin and I'm confident in my own ability to know you go and do that. That we as a player be giving you all to say, well, speak to what's Andy Cook that can get coaching, or he's good at man management, or tactically he's this, or you know what, I didn't like this, but I appreciated that. They're the kind of conversations I want players to go away and have about me. And for me, that's the most powerful tool, because, you know, I'm trying to sell a dream and I'm trying to be a salesman in those moments. And I think everybody knows that. It's like this open secret that the head coaches or the coaches that come and speak to you are always, you know, the sales people at that point, aren't they? And they're trying to pitch everything. Go away and do your own research on a club, on a player, on a coach, on whatever it is. Find out what people think about them, and then build a picture up in your mind of what it is. And then go and have another conversation and go, I heard this, what about this? Or if something just aligns with what you think, you go, oh, this is the person who I want to work with.
So I'm not. So looking as a parent here in the United States, you're saying all the great things, talking about all the right way of development, philosophies, coaching, leadership. How do you see your philosophy coming over to the United States and being successful, and can it pair well with what we're doing here?
Yeah, I absolutely think it can. I think for me, I would love the opportunity to work in the States, to have the opportunity to work with the great players and athletes and coaches that are there. 3 probably coaching idols that I have is John Wooden, Pat Summitt, and Bill Belichick, and especially John Wooden and Pat Summitt. This goes way back to when I was in university. Those 2 coaches were 2 coaches that really based my dissertation, my final assessment and assignment on, of how professional coaches develop athletes, and some of the little isms that John Wooden had and the way that Pat Summitt would deliver her basketball sessions. They're, for me, what really started my coaching career, in a sense of those little moments of how people work, how people, like I've just mentioned, build trust, and ultimately try and get the best out of people and try and get the best out of the people that are in front of them. And I think for me, that's how I would want to try and translate that. I've said it would be anything between 7 minutes and 7 months in terms of building trust, but I trust my own ability. I trust my own actions and how I can communicate with different people to make sure that would be a success. And I think that's been shown throughout my career. It's always had a little bit of blind determination, and I would have that coming over to America, to the great country that it is, to make sure that anyone that I coach would be coaching the best way possible. And like I say, people like a Pat Summitt and a John Wooden, for me, are absolute idols in coaching. And I know they're not in football, but those 2 coaches, if anyone happens to come across my Twitter account, or X account I should say now, I think John Wooden's Pyramid of Success is on the headline of my X account. I think it's Andy Cook 87 for anyone that is keen. But if you're not that bored, you don't have to. And there's something that I've always fallen back on, and that's exactly what I believe I'd be able to do and how I'd be able to work in the United States.
If you're looking at programs here, what would be the first thing you would try to do to help a club to be successful here in the United States? Because I look at it as a parent, the conversations we've had today is phenomenal. And to have a coach like you and have the influence that you could have, what would the changes you'd make, and what level would you want to try to jump into here in the United States first?
I think if there was an opportunity, obviously at a professional level, My experience has been in the women's game. I think that is obviously the starting point for me. If there was opportunities within the women's game, that is something that would no doubt appeal to me and no doubt appeal to maybe potential employers. But I feel like my coaching can translate both genders. I've worked within the boys' academy game here in England. I've worked non-league football with men's teams over here in England. The coaching would translate. The ability to communicate is the same. But I think that for me would be the starting point in terms of where my CV is right now.
Like it. I like hearing that. And how would you try to make the impact? Because there's so many things you can come in and do. Would you do a whole club analysis? Would you come in and figure out if you had to start at the beginning, like a U19 team or U17 team in a club? Would you come in with on guns a-blazing, or would you come in trying to understand the culture and then build your culture upon that culture?
It would be first and foremost the culture. I would come into whatever environment, it would be understanding what the culture is. I mentioned it at Nottingham Forest. I went in there with a team that was at the relegation zone when I took them over, and I had players from the city. We managed to bring some players externally. We managed to build on the culture that was already there at Nottingham. At Newcastle was very different. That team was all brought together. There was a lot of people from Newcastle, a lot of Geordies, but it was all brought together. So we all had this common goal of getting promotion because we were the first professional team in the UK at Tier 3. So we had this common purpose. And then at Norwich, it was different again. It was a culture that was already embedded. I brought myself into the culture there, and I felt like I'd become an adopted Norfolk child in terms of where Norwich sits in the county here in the UK. So for me, it would be very much that. It would be trying to work out what the culture is, how the people are, what the situation is, and embed myself within that. Then the little bits that I have, the respect, the accountability, the trust that I would build would come over time. And that's, for me, what I've learned over the last few teams I've been with. If there was a different situation and somebody wanted me to go in and lead it because it might not be the right environment and it might not be the positive situation that they want to find themselves in, if it was a club or if it was a youth program, then that's absolutely fine. I'm quite happy to come in and say this is what we're going to go after. I think I've outlined that enough in our conversation. So for me, that would be the first start, learning the culture, but it would depend on the remit of what is asked.
I like that. And then I'm going to ask this question. So parents listening in, because you've ran the gamut in your career so far, and it's impressive that you're younger than me and I'm 42. And you've done a lot of it in your mid-20s and had so much success from there to where you're at today. What is one thing the parents should be listening for, from development to culture ideas to how to push their players to the next level to be successful? Because to me, if you can figure out how to do that, I don't care what level you're coaching at, you're doing to be successful.
I think the first thing that a parent needs to look out for is honesty. Honesty in a sense of what the coach is saying is being replicated on the pitch, and then what the coach is saying to the players themselves, is that then being replicated on the pitch. And if you can get that, then that builds up that trust again. Then it comes back to what I'm saying about, for me, my non-negotiables of respect and accountability. I think if you get honest coaches in that sense of, this is where your son or daughter is, this is how I'm going to get there, or how I'm going to try and get them to get to this point, and then they start delivering on those messages, you can't ask for much more than that, because then it comes down to a lot of different aspects and a lot of different outcomes. But if a parent goes to a coach and says, I think my daughter's good enough to go and play collegiate and then potentially go and get into the, let's say, the NWSL, if it was a female player there as an example, then how can a coach get them to that endpoint? They might only have them for 2 seasons or 3 seasons. So we're going to work on this and this. And then does that translate? And then does it come back to Is the player enjoying it? Is my daughter enjoying it? Is she taking something from the coach every single week? For me, that's honest.
Like that. And I'm going to wrap this up with my favorite question. Who has been the greatest influence on you as a player, as a coach, in this beautiful game? And it can be multiple people. It doesn't have to be one person.
Anyone that's listening that knows me well will laugh when I say this, but a player that has had the greatest influence on me is a Brazilian footballer that played for Middlesbrough called Juninho. He is by far the greatest footballer I've ever seen live. When I was a boy, and this probably goes back to the very first question we had of what drove me to the game, to love this beautiful game, Juninho Paulista. There's a few Juninhos in Brazil, but Juninho Paulista came from Sao Paulo to Middlesbrough, and he was just perfect. So as a player, it's Juninho Paulista playing for Middlesbrough. If it's a 7 point of which is non-football, non-soccer, but those two coaches for me are absolute idols in the way that they would transmit their ideas and how they could get their coaching methodology across to players. In modern day football, the first one and the god for me in terms of coaching is Jose Mourinho. He was the one that really probably started when I was a young coach. He was at Porto and then he came over to Chelsea and that was it. And more recently, I think everyone would say Pep Guardiola, the way that he's probably revolutionized the game.
Today's conversation with Coach Andy landed on something every coach and player and parent should hear. You coach the players in front of you, not the system in your head. He took a left back named Charlotte Greengrass and put her as the number 9 and watched her score 22 goals and win a league. He built a Nottingham Forest side that went from one spot above relegation to a league and a cup double in 4 years. He did it by explaining every single decision he made, however long it took. He had 2 non-negotiables, and they are accountability and respect, right down to leaving the away changing room better than you found it. And when I asked about what parents should be looking for, he didn't say trophies or exposure. He said honesty. Does what the coach tells you actually show up on the pitch? Then there's the line I'll be carrying around for a while. At 27, you should still be playing the game like you're 7. A big thanks for Andy for joining me today.